All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It is February 12th, 2025, and this is a public meeting of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. This is a special meeting on PCCEP subcommittees and structure, mostly or completely focused on internal PCCEP affairs tonight. So a little peek behind the curtain. And yeah, but in the interest of doing PCEP's work in public, we are holding this as a public meeting. So yeah, we can move on ahead here. And we'll still do some of our intros and community agreements. So I'll pass it to Afrida.
Thanks, Dory. Can we go ahead and have PCEP members go ahead and come off of mute and introduce yourself, please?
I can go first. Leslie Martinez, PCEP member, and my pronouns are she, hers. I'll pass it off to Tia.
My name is Tia Palafox. My pronoun is she, her, and I am a co-chair of the Community Engagement Subcommittee. And I'll pass it on to Viva. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Viva.
Viva. Okay.
Yeah. Hi. Viva
Hi.
Campo, she, her pronouns, PCEP member, and I will pass it to Odelia.
Hi, my name is Odelia. I use she, her pronouns. I am the co-chair for the Community Engagement Subcommittee. I'll pass it to Devonte.
Hello, Devonta Manyweather, PCEP member. Been involved at this point with both subcommittees. And I will pass it off to Kip.
Hi, Carrie Driver, she, her pronouns, and I'm a PCEP member. I'll pass it to Kip.
Cool, thank you. Kip Silverman, he, him pronouns, co-chair of the Settlement and Policy Subcommittee, at least for another 2 weeks until we figure out what we're doing next. So, I'm trying to see, I think that's everybody, or yeah, did everybody go from PCEP?
So I don't think Noelle is with us just yet. So
yeah, I don't see her. Okay, cool.
Let's go ahead and open the floor for city employees to go ahead and introduce themselves.
Oh, there's Noelle.
Oh.
We'll give her a second, unless she wants to jump right in.
I'm right now. I'm okay to introduce myself right now. I'm Noelle Cut-Hair. I'm a new member to the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. Thank you all for being here.
Excellent. Thanks for you being here too, Noelle. All right, city employees, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Who goes first? Good evening, Mary Claire Buckley, Portland Police Bureau, she, her pronouns.
Hi, folks. Sorry, I don't know why my camera won't work, but Stephanie Howard from the Public Safety Service Area. I use she, her pronouns. Happy to be here tonight.
Elizabeth Press, she, her pronouns. I'm with the Public Safety Service Area.
Hi, I'm Sarah Ames, she, her pronouns, and I'm a deputy city attorney supporting PCEP.
And I'm Dory Grabinski, PCEP program manager. And monitor folks, feel free to jump in at this time as well.
Antoinette, you want to go?
Greetings all, Antoinette Edwards, member of the Independent Monitoring Team. It's good to see you all.
And I'm Mark Smith. Good evening, everyone. He, him, and his are my pronouns, and I'm the lead monitor for the Independent Court-Appointed Monitoring Team. Thanks for having us.
And I see Jorge.
Oh, wonderful.
Hi, Dory.
Jorge, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Jorge.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Jorge. I am a PCCEP member. I'm one of the youth members along with Odelia. And yeah, I won't state subcommittees because we're going through a change. So, but yeah, I'm just glad to be here.
All right. And community members, we asked you go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Yeah, just let us know you're here. Can I get the slides again? Wonderful. Now we'll go into the community agreements, and this time around, I'll go ahead and run through these. Our agreements here in this space is to listen actively and respectfully, share airtime, be present and open to new information and perspectives, assume positive intent, respect each other, respect the group, speak your own truth, communicate directly, honestly, and respectfully, ask questions to clarify, call out bias, and be okay with ambiguity. Next slide, please. Our overview of our meeting today will begin with some updates, and then we're going to introduce the process improvement goals and subcommittee options. We'll have a breakout activity in which those who are added to the breakout rooms will be able to have further discussions around the subcommittee options. Then we'll discuss other have a discussion and discuss other considerations, and then we'll make a decision at the conclusion of this meeting. Next slide. On to updates.
Okay, just super quick reminder here that we do have elections scheduled for the 26th. So no meeting next week. And also remember that I believe next Wednesday is the evening council session of the month, right? Third Wednesday? No, it's the second Wednesday. Huh, there are only 3 Wednesdays this month. Well, we are scheduled for the 26th for elections. Okay, well, we have to stick with that. And on the 13th, there are 4, no, I only see 3 Wednesdays. Oh, okay, sorry. There was a 5th. Okay, it is the 3rd. Sorry, I'm just all over the place right now. Okay, it is the 3rd Wednesday of the month. That's the council meeting, and our elections are on the 26th. We are good to go. Thank you, Dan. Okay, and then tomorrow, PCCEP's meeting with Chief Day and the SSD team to talk through the response to the PCCEP Veil of Darkness recommendation. For those of you who are in our meeting last week, Chief Lavelle, Assistant Chief Lavelle was there, and PCCEP talked through some of their concerns with him. And so they are honoring that discussion with a follow-up meeting, and our first follow-up meeting will be tomorrow. I agree with Kip's comment in the chat. It has been a very long month this week so far. Yeah, so those are our updates, just a little scheduling stuff for you. Okay. So this meeting, as I said at the beginning, is all about specifically drilling down on how PCCEP wants to move forward with its subcommittees. And I just want to start by recapping some of the discussions we've been having. The impetus to kind of reconsider subcommittees is really coming from this larger discussion about improving process overall. And so here you can see some of the general consensus around the areas that PCCEP would like to improve. So that includes group communication, how the committee is approaching project planning and priority setting for all parts of the committee, i.e. how agendas are being set and priorities are being identified, and how that's servicing in the whole body of the committee. Improving division of labor and making sure that all the parts of the committee are truly operating as distinct parts. And then overall coordination. So there has been agreement to adopt a steering committee. And then, so how that fits in with the full committee, how the subcommittees report to the full committee, and how the subcommittees are coordinating with each other. So these are going to be goals that we're going to be working, staff and PCCEP are going to be working on for, months and I'm sure longer to come. So just kind of keep this in the back of your mind. I think standing up all of these things is really going to help with our overall goals in addition to the subcommittee discussion. Okay. So at the retreat on Saturday that PCCEP had, we looked at two kind of pairs of subcommittee options. And so here's what we called option A. Option A, you'll notice, looks rather similar to PCCEP's current structure, but there are some things that are different, namely identifying how exactly the work gets, like where the work originates and how that determines which subcommittee it goes to. So for community engagement and equity, all subcommittee content originates with community sentiment or concern that is not directly related to a policy, essentially. There's an intent to have more emphasis on outreach and engagement to Portland's diverse communities, and that would be supported by new community engagement staff. Policy and reform, sort of the other side of the coin there. This one, all content would directly originate with a PPB or city policy procedure, directive report, etc. This subcommittee could also potentially consider the work of the independent monitor, interact more directly with the DOJ settlement, and other parts of the whole ecosystem, such as the PPA. Any questions on option A as the PCCEP discussed on Saturday? I mean, it's hypothetical, so I don't have necessarily the answers. Okay.
I just wanted to say I really like option A.
Great. Yeah, and I'm rehashing this because not all of our members were able to make the retreat, and then of course we do have members of the public and other folks here. So yeah, it's great to hear that. Okay, let's go to option B. Okay, option B may look familiar to some folks here. So we have behavioral health and wellness and racial justice and equity. This may look familiar because around almost 3 years ago at this point, PCCEP had versions of subcommittees that looked like this before switching to what is currently in place. So I think these topics are a little more straightforward. So for behavioral health and wellness, that content would originate with topics that fall under that umbrella. As far as I'm aware, similar to the prior behavioral health subcommittee, this could also include PPV, workforce wellness. And what they would end up working on is recommendations and community engagement that would be about behavioral health. And then racial justice and equity, similarly, that content would originate with topics that address racial disparities and advocate for policies that advance racial equity and do more community engagement around that and advance those kinds of recommendations. Any questions on option B? Okay, and this is just a quick overview. We're gonna get deep into discussion in a few minutes here. Okay, before we do that, just leaving you with a few thoughts. So I think these are both good options. They would both work. And the key to making either one work is that PCCEP really needs to make sure that all 4 of those options are reflected in whatever 2 subcommittees you choose. There was discussion about that at the retreat. And so I think some of those process improvements that I kind of summarized a few minutes ago are really going to help support making that happen, and we have more work to do there. Next slide. And finally, bear with me on this one, but I just kind of appreciated reading this definition. So I got this, the definition I liked the most came from a website called wowlazy.com. But I'm just going to read it. So a subcommittee is a smaller group of individuals tasked with focusing on a specific aspect or subset of that parent committee's responsibilities. This allows for more in-depth exploration and specialization, enabling the subcommittee to delve deeper into complex issues and provide more nuanced recommendations. By dividing the workload and expertise, subcommittees can tackle detailed tasks and projects that might otherwise overwhelm the full committee, thereby enhancing the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the organization. So whatever option you gravitate towards, whatever kind of services as the best option for you all, is the one that should make it easier for you to delegate responsibilities and produce that deep work and advance what you feel are PCCEP's goals. So I know you all know what a subcommittee is, but sometimes I like to read, remind myself, oh yeah, this is what the thing is supposed to do. So, okay. So now we're going to do something a little more interactive than we normally do in these meetings, which I think is going to be fun. Okay. Any volunteer to read this prompt? Because I've been doing a lot of talking.
I can read it.
Great.
Exercise. You are the PCCEP steering committee and you've just decided to work on the topic of consent searches. Consent searches are searches conducted by law enforcement after obtaining the voluntary consent of the person being investigated. Now you must assign the topic to a part of the committee. Evaluate how PCCEP could approach this topic using option A and option B. For each option, decide which subcommittee you would send the topic to. Consider how your choice would impact the direction of the work. If you believe both subcommittees in one option could work on the topic, discuss what the distinct work product would be in each subcommittee and how you would approach handing the topic off to different parts of the committee.
Okay. So we're going to create some breakout rooms, but before we do that, do you all have questions about the intention of the exercise or what it's asking?
Are we going to have the questions listed in the last paragraph in the breakout rooms?
Yes, we'll share this whole thing in addition to what option A and option B were into the breakout rooms. So just to emphasize, the idea is to think about both pairs of subcommittees and say, if we had the topic of consent searches and we're the steering committee, and this was our subcommittee package, like we had these two, which one would it go to? What would that look like? What would the work be? And if we had the other option, same thing. So kind of do that evaluation, see how that process is for you. And how it feels to kind of, evaluate the topic and of course we're doing this to see if, you have, if anything surfaces for you trying to put either option into practice.
You will have someone in the room with you to help support you all through this discussion as well. So if you have further questions about the slides that will be displayed or need support on getting back on track, whatever it may be, there'll be someone in the room with you to support.
Can you stop sharing for a second, Liz? So let's see here. We have, how many members? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 members. Okay, so we could do either 2 or 3 breakout rooms, and PCEP members, I think we were thinking about only having community members join you in the breakout rooms, in addition to like 1 staff person if you do have questions. Does that sound okay to you?
That works for me.
Yeah.
Great. So with that said, any city monitor PPB folks, we're gonna hang out in just the main room, and if you have work to catch up on or whatever, we're expecting this to take around 30 minutes or so. So we appreciate you being here, and you can hang around to hear the results of the discussion. Okay, so would you rather have smaller groups or slightly bigger groups, like 2 groups or 3 groups? PCEP, what do you think? I think maybe
How many people per?
we have 9 PCEP members, so we could do like 4 or 5 PCEP members in each, or 3 and 3 and 3. And then
So I did kind of start to break it up. If we do 3 rooms, we have a group of 6 and then 2 groups of 5.
I think that makes sense to me because I think a smaller group will allow more people to talk, or the people in the room will be able to discuss more than a big group where folks can dominate the conversation.
Makes sense to me.
I agree with Leslie.
PCEP, you could invite monitor folks to the breakout rooms, or you could keep it just PCEP and community. What do you think? That question has been asked.
I guess as long as the monitor folks aren't going to be disruptive. But
I think the question is more about like who do you want weighing in on your process?
yeah,
I think everyone will be responsible, of course, but
Dory, can I chime in really quickly? What's I think most important to me on behalf of our team is whatever PCEP members are most comfortable with is the right answer. So do not worry about anything about that. If we are included, what I see our role is continue to simply be observation. I don't believe we have a role in deciding or in affecting the decision, and so we're happy to observe. However, if there's more comfort in us not going, that's okay too. We are not here to disrupt any of the work. So either one is good with us. If we're there, we'll be observing. If not, no problem.
Okay, great. Good to know. Okay. Any strong feelings either way?
I think most of us seem okay with them joining. I think, yeah,
that's what I'm seeing as
yes
well.
To joining the meetings.
All right, sounds like a plan. So let's do those smaller groups, and then the monitor folks, Liz, just don't count them as a participant, just an extra person there. So Afrida, Elizabeth, and I will be joining one of the rooms, just as support, but I'm not planning on participating much either, just answering questions if you have clarifying questions. Alrighty, so Liz will put those together, and we'll just wait for a second on that. everybody. We have most people back. Everyone back. All right. I think now we're ready to kind of hear what you all talked about. So I'll hand it over to Afrida to kind of get us going here. I think on the next slide I had just a few prompts, but whatever came up for you, we want to hear it.
Yeah, thanks, Dory. Yeah, so in this discussion, we really want to center around these few prompts here. What surfaced in your breakout groups? Did one option make it easier to identify distinct work than the other? If you determine both subcommittees could work on the topic, how would the result be different in each one, or would it? I know the group that I was in, they had a really great conversation, and the last one we thought was completely wrapped up, another question came up. So looking forward to hearing how this went for other groups as well. So is there a particular group that would like to start? Ooh, I love when this happens. This means the facilitator gets to choose a group. Dory, what about the group that you were in? Would they like to go ahead and share first about their discussion?
Sure, they would. Yeah, I was with Kip, Leslie, Noel, and Barbara Baczynski. Any takers?
I vote Barbara. No,
I'm sure she'd do a great job.
she would. And we don't have to put her to work though. I think we had a lot of, and guys, keep me honest on the characterization, please, but a lot of discussion on trying to figure out the mechanics of using the option A scenario or the option B scenario. We pretty much lean towards the option A scenario. We think would lend itself to a better assignment process from the steering committee. But we also were thinking that there's pieces that either subcommittee could pick up. So while we're thinking the option A would work in this scenario, it would likely be mostly the policy subcommittee that would take up this kind of work, but maybe not necessarily, depending on how it was approached. And we also had some conversation about if it's a really big issue, maybe we need more weighing in from the public and from the policy aspect to determine how things ought to proceed. So the last thing I'll mention is that we realize that if we try something new, we'll probably still need to iterate and improve regardless. Did I miss anything, Leslie?
There was some discussion about option B. I know Noel had a comment about that I thought was interesting. If she wants to share, or anyone, Leslie or Barbara.
What was the comment you were thinking of, Dory?
Just when you were thinking about the challenges in assigning with
Yes.
option B.
Yes, because each one, like racial or behavioral health, could be too isolating. They could also overlap in that regard. Community engagement, I think handling something where you need that feedback from the community on consent searches would give an ability for everyone to speak on it, those from behavioral health sector or racial justice. But that with option B, it is too isolating.
Leslie or Barbara, did we miss anything else? Anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so, not on my end.
Not me either.
Okay, that does it for us, I think.
Yeah. Can we go with Elizabeth? Elizabeth, you had a group, right?
Yes.
All right.
We had Odelia, Viva, and Tia, and Dan Handelman. Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah. So as always, we were like, why not both? Basically we talked through, I would say for option B, our initial thoughts were like probably racial equity subcommittee, and it like truly depends on how this arises and what the incident was or how it comes up, and that will really like determine where it goes. But I think we also felt like it could fit into both into both subcommittees under option A. Because again, if like it's based on where it originates, then it depends on where it originates. But like we talked about the difference in product that could potentially come, because if it was in the policy and reform, then like definitely the product would be a change in the police directive or the policy around consent searches or anything like that. Whereas if it was under community engagement, perhaps it would be like there's just a lot of other options. And with like focusing on things like accountability or like harm repair, like there's so many things. So I felt like we didn't really make any like big decisions. Felt like things could go anywhere, and we're just talking about like really the issues we've had, like where things jump into different subcommittees and how like it feels like that could happen again if like things fit into racial equity and behavioral health, or if it's like a lot of community engagement but a lot of like policy stuff. So yeah, do you guys have anything to add to that? Yeah.
I just raised my hand because I jumped in quickly only because my head went so fast to the searches, going back to what we learned about the racial disparities around consent searches or just searches in general. And that I felt like the steering committee would probably move it over to option B, starting with the racial equity group. But then we were having more discussions if it was a mental health crisis, it might start there. So it was a real interesting conversation. Then moved it to what would it look like in option A, but I really felt like it would be option B, subcommittee 1, due to the fact of the racial disparities around searches. But I think, yeah.
Yes, we focused on pros and cons of both. We could figure it could work either place. But yeah, if there was kind of some intersectionality in option B, it would make it challenging to figure out where the workflow goes. There's definitely going to be, originating events that have overlap with both sections. And so who's tasked with it then? And then for the option A, kind of what Adelia was saying too, is that both could be working on it. But how do you make sure there's those good boundaries in the working sessions, and so it doesn't all just blend together? The whole group meets, for all the meetings. Yeah. So.
Any other thoughts from that group?
Oh, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Thank you. So I mean, I wasn't really weighing in much on A, B, but what I said was that you have to make sure that the full committee meetings have very thorough presentations from the subcommittees, so that if one committee needs to hand something off to the other, or if somebody's working on developing a product, and so as not to surprise everybody or do all the work and then have to go back and start again, you can kind of really report on things as it's going along. So that's my contribution to this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. All right. That leaves my group. So Devontae, Carrie, Jorge, and then we had Debbie and Barb as our community members who were a part of the group. So Carrie bowed out gracefully from speaking, so turning it to Devontae and Jorge.
I can talk.
Yeah, Devontae, if you want to, and then I'll just add on.
Sure. So for option A, I think we had a pretty general consensus that it would go to the policy and reform committee regarding consent searches. There is, I think right now we're trying to move away from it feeling like we have to attend every meeting to know what's going on and to actually kind of separate the subcommittees. But I guess pro with option A is that it's very easy to discern that it just goes where it goes, I guess, because it's so separated in that manner, or in that regard. But I still see there being a lot of overlap, because oftentimes we're hoping that through our community engagement that we end up having enough information to make a recommendation that would preferably alter policy or cause some sort of reform. So that overlap isn't really going away, I don't feel like. But I think that it is easy to categorize everything as either community engagement or policy and reform. So that's a pro with that option. For option B, I guess we talked a lot about origin being important. So depending on, the origin surrounding a particular circumstance or how that topic even came up to us, that would determine how we categorized it. If somebody, a community member was stopped and they had said, hey, this is racial profiling, consent search issues stem from a problem with race or, racial equity, it would go there. But then there's also a lot of situations where there is a mental health crisis, especially with, among the transient community. And so is that person even able to consent to a search, right? And so I think that depending on what the circumstances were surrounding it, that it could go to behavioral health and wellness as well. So I think that is a strength there, is that it keeps both of those kind of driving reasons for PCCEP's conception to remain at the forefront, and then the outliers can be incorporated into either of those. So we did talk about that. And then at the very end, we also were kind of talking about, well, there's a lot of redundancy in the community engagement aspect of it, because ideally either subcommittee, any subcommittee is going to have a focus of community engagement and then obviously putting forth actionable items or policy reforms. So do we need to have those be separate pieces, or should each subcommittee, no matter what they are, have those elements included, is something that we talked about at the end. So instead of community engagement, could it instead be something like, policy and reform as one committee, and then community harm, repair, and equity as a different subcommittee, versus community engagement, because we're supposed to be getting a full community engagement staff. So there's a lot of redundancy there. So I think that was a lot of what we had talked about. Jorge, if I missed anything.
Yeah, I think yeah, we did stir away from the question a bit and just started talking about option A and option B. We did try to see how the issue would fall under each subcommittee. So with obviously it was community engagement and policy reform, racial justice, and then behavioral health and wellness. And that question did someone mentioned earlier about, it all kind of depends on where it originates, and what the context is, what the story behind it, and so forth. we did also talk about how with this change, we want to make sure it doesn't cause another stir where folks have to attend both subcommittee meetings to be aware of things. But also how subcommittees are going to work together on the matter, like no matter what it is. So like with the issues, like if we go with option A, like community engagement there, like seeing like how the issue was affected, if other folks have been affected through it, seeing kind of like the trend. And then obviously if there's like an issue and we want to resolve it, or just also doing like an investigation and seeing like what the procedure is, it goes to policy reform and then kind of, like sending it back and forth to make sure each subcommittee isn't doing something that the other subcommittee should be doing, so it doesn't cause that overlap. But I think the thing that we all agreed on, including community members, was that each subcommittee should have some community engagement, no matter what the tasks or responsibilities are. And so I think an idea that we kind of thought about and just kind of, and we didn't like say we agreed or not agreed with it, but was seeing kind of changing the name of one of the subcommittees from, especially in option A where it's community engagement equity, to more to one of the ones in option B, but definitely having that policy and like reform being its own thing. That was a question that kind of arose, but something that we didn't come to a conclusion about. Yeah, Carrie, if you want to add on to what we have said.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Jorge, you actually hit one of my points right at the end there where, and I see Odelia wrote community advocacy and Devante said fostering trust, for a replacement name for community engagement, because we all feel that it's confusing to have a subcommittee named community engagement if we're all meant to be doing that and we're having a full-time community engagement person. And then to add on to what both Devante and Jorge said, I think the main concern, like it was easier to put things into place in Model A. It was easier to pass projects from one subcommittee to another in Model A. But the concern is that there would be too much bleeding if the procedural, the process wasn't better. And then also making sure that the B, the main topics, the behavioral health and wellness, racial equity, and racial justice and equity were all represented in a specifically called out to make sure that it wasn't just seen as like a function subcommittee. It was also, the mission of the settlement was still relevant, but we don't want the longest acronym in the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
having like a more a description that makes sure that the breadth of what the topics we wanted to cover were there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is really good. I feel like I completely agree. I feel like if we're evaluating option A, one of the main problems is not just the name, but the name and the way that it is influencing, part of the content there. So I'd like to maybe discuss that a little more. And then something that occurred to me in this exercise, I put it in the chat, but that I forgot to mention earlier. I originally stated it as how the work would originate, but I think it's really more about what the committee identifies as the goal of the work product prior to beginning work on it. And that really would impact where the work goes. For instance, in the Model A scenario, as you all know, like a huge part of what PCCEP does, like, yes, recommendations and policy review and that kind of thing are really big for PCCEP, but a huge part of what you do is like community education, sharing information, things that are centered around being that that bridge and that sort of more ambiguous work there. And that in and of itself is a work product and a goal around a lot of topics. I think that helps me clarify it a little bit, but I think there's still a little bit more drilling down to do on that side of it, especially with some of the other like as Devante said, the representation and centering that we want to do of specific groups named under the settlement. So yeah, that's just what I want to say.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think what Dan commented of like, there's an issue of like, how do we know our goal before doing like community engagement or things like that. And I think sometimes we do know, like for Portland Street Response, like when we were working on that, I think we all knew like this is going to take a lot of community engagement. And for other things like Veil of Darkness, like those like things can be really nuanced and hard to engage with, and like knowing that that's more of like a policy thing. But are there instances where we won't know? Like that's kind of the thing I'm stuck on, but I also can't think of an example right now, so maybe that's good. But
I do, yeah, I think that's an important thing to discuss as well. And that comes, the way that that is addressed is having a more functional system of coordination and handing things off to other parts of the committee. Because your goal might, you might begin by thinking our goal here is to educate the public about consent searches. We want to have an event in every district saying these are your rights. But then the goal might evolve and it might become more policy oriented. And so you need a system to say, we're handing this off as a distinct work product. It's not going to show up in these meetings, but we want the ability to say, hey, we'd like the other subcommittee to consider doing this.
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think just like having boundaries and talking about them would be awesome. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Devante, I know you had your hand up a second ago and raised it. Do you want to go ahead and go?
Yeah, I guess just a question. Is the goal to have one subcommittee to be able to cleanly hand off to the other subcommittee without bleed over? Or is the goal to have both subcommittees be able to work it as far as they can and then push it up to the full committee so that finishing touches can be done? I guess I am more under the impression that it would be more efficient and productive to have both subcommittees to be self-sufficient in the way that they can do their community engagement as well as address the policy alteration that they are wanting to see happen, and then push that up, and then the whole committee with all members can vote on it, I guess is what I would like to see. But I think that that's kind of where the difference in opinion is.
Is there someone want to speak on? Yeah, that's all I had now.
Yeah, I think there's agreement largely that there should be, the subcommittee should be distinct, and then we need to eliminate the bleed over. I've heard agreement about that. I think it is possible that some topics would merit the work of both subcommittees if they both want to do distinct projects on them, not necessarily at the same time. Like, it just might evolve that way. But then, of course, also, as people pointed out, there needs to be a more functional system of elevating that work to the full committee always as well. And sometimes it would just be that. So I'd say both to me. And I'm also thinking a lot about this. I've been talking to some colleagues. It's interesting because city council is in the process of figuring out these rules for themselves. So if this feels hard, it is. It's really hard to figure out how to create a functional system and, do this as a group and, update how you want to work together. Yeah, I know Elizabeth's been spending some time thinking about that. If you have any questions for her, that might help your thinking.
If Kip can go, he's been waiting for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I want to say kind of bolsters what we were just discussing is that the work we do is challenging and it doesn't always lend itself to immediate clarity. But one of the things we talked about in the breakout session was that these aren't set in stone, that we will have a new intention of how we want to do things, how we envision it. We'll inform each other along the way, and we can tweak things and iterate to keep making it better. I think we previously kind of were like, oh, this is the way we do it, so let's just push along those routes. And what came of that is like, no, we need to reinvent it some. So I think the opportunity to keep iterating and getting better at it is part of this entire process. So, because it isn't all clear cut, and we can learn from the city council and Elizabeth's direct input. So, yeah, same Devante.
Are there any questions to Elizabeth right now about her involvement and perspective?
Do you have any advice based on what you're seeing?
Also, do you have an opinion?
Yeah, but both of those, yes.
I don't necessarily have an opinion. I think what we're seeing from city council right now is they've now chosen their subcommittees. They're in the process of doing them and they're coming up with the rules as they go along. So I think I've heard it a couple times is that like, I think you're going to choose a path and then you're probably going to come up with, okay, how does this work as issues come up? And I think just documenting them and making sure you all know how you want things to work and are able to pivot when those issues happen. I think if there was a perfect way of doing it, we probably would have figured it out by now. But I will just say again, like that's the way kind of city council was like, okay, these are the topics we want to have subcommittees on. And kind of like your steering committee, they have a governance committee that is kind of deciding how these things are going to work as they're already in the process. So there's definitely, I can't tell you that they've perfected it, but I will say that I think whatever decision you all make, you'll just want to come back and just keep reiterating or keep writing down like, okay, this is the direction that we want to go, and create a process that you're going to follow no matter what, and make sure I would say make sure your co-chairs and your chairs are the ones that are kind of holding everybody accountable.
That's great. And I was thinking about at the retreat how a very common theme I felt was, subcommittees not being able to work on a subcommittee and not feel like we have to all attend all committees. And then also feeling like we've fulfilled the community need, and as committee members we're fulfilled. So Elizabeth, thank you for sharing that, because it's helpful to think about like, is whatever system we choose, is it supporting us in those things that we've all defined as common hopes.
All right. Jorge, noticed you came off of mute earlier. Did you have anything else you want to add to this conversation?
No, I mean, no, I was just gonna say what Adelia and Devontae said. That was what I was gonna ask Elizabeth if she had any advice for us. And obviously Devontae, an opinion. I think the only thing I would probably say to respond to Elizabeth's is, obviously, city council's learning and we're also learning, and that we can definitely, like go back to this and change things up if we need to. That's the good thing about it. It's not a very hard process where we have to do a lot of steps. It's just us having a conversation and obviously getting public input and then deciding. So that's really what I got.
Jorge. All right. Dory?
Yeah, we do have a couple of other considerations. Liz, if you want to pull that up. So to sort of muddy these crystal clear waters, just a couple of other things for you all to think about. So PCCEP does have other tasks that do take up meeting time. As some of you know, we used to have COCL town halls. There has been desire expressed to have independent monitor town halls as they're assuming this new role. That this happened in PCCEP meetings. Preparing the presentations to the judge. Ideally that does happen in a subcommittee meeting. There might be others that you can think of. Can anyone think of any other ones off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think
Data?
Odelia beat me to it, but future like work with council will definitely be a big one, especially with the public safety policy committee on council. I know that one will definitely be a big one. We'll be working with.
Carrie is identifying, yep, the stops data in the chat. That's something, there are a couple things like that under the settlement that are named that PCCEP typically looks at every year. Yeah, so just kind of thinking about those pieces of it. That's also something you should consider when thinking about this decision. Devontae.
Is this like where we comment or are we just going through the
Yeah.
slides?
The floor is open. Yeah.
Gotcha. I would think that the full committee would be a great time for those things to be addressed, and if need be, the different co-chairs can come together at some point during the week or some other time. I'm not sure, but I would think that the full committee would make perfect sense to me.
Odelia?
For me, I think I've said this like 4 times, but why not a 5th? This will make the most sense under option A, the reform and policy. Like, I just think that would take up a lot of full committee time. And I think like doing the COCL town halls, they used to be during the settlement and policy meetings, and I think that made sense. So keeping that makes most sense for me.
Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing at first, Odea, but when Devontae started talking, it does. I feel like if we're being more strategic about what recommendation or directive revision or whatever a subcommittee might be assigned to work on, trying to host the big report out type meetings in the subcommittee could derail the momentum on those things. So I feel like it might make sense to try to move those into full committee meetings. but the full committee meetings would, by nature, are generally longer also and don't have to be devoted to the entire thing. So I'm again, I think process-wise, we can work out the different movements and structures of it. But again, if our goal is to be more effective of getting recommendations out and things like that, the subcommittee work should probably be more focused on that piece of it.
Go ahead, Carrie.
I think it would be great if for the annual things that don't fall into the subcommittees, we had a mentorship model where a legacy person mentored a newbie in a little team that did the work to present to the committee, to have them review, then passing on the experience.
Like for what type of thing,
Like-
Carrie?
Like writing the testimony for the hearings, you know, we do that 4 times a year. It would be great for some of the new members to get in on that. You know, with the partnership of a former member to then pass it on.
Got it.
Jorge?
I mean, to Carrie's point, I like the idea of that. I definitely would have, like when I first joined in, I definitely would have liked that. But to mine, I think I'm a bit, I think I'm still like trying to figure out my stance on this issue, like on the conversation that we're having right now. I think the only additional thing that I would say is, to Adelia's point. Sorry, Adelia, if I'm gonna steal your question.
I can't believe you.
But I think like it goes back to the purpose of like what like the origin and everything like that. Because obviously like we're talking about the tasks and responsibilities of the 2 subcommittees we choose, but I think making it clear on also like the full committee too, because obviously like if a question gets asked or something, it gets brought up to everyone here, and then we get to decide like, oh, this goes to this subcommittee, and then they, have a conversation that from there it goes to the full committee, and like, a decision gets made, a decision doesn't, goes back to the committee. I think to Ojelia's point, like kind of seeing like what is the purpose other than like doing like a full vote that makes that recommendation, but also the additional like responsibilities and duties, because to Kip's view, like and to other folks that have mentioned it, like, okay, we have like what could be considered not in these 2 subcommittees, but to like just the full committee, but also making sure the full committees don't take up, all this time, because we want to focus on specific things and not take tasks that should be in a subcommittee than in a full committee. And Odelia, if you want to top it.
Yeah.
Well, that's my question is how should the full committee function? What parts of PCEP should belong there besides votes?
Yeah. And I think the other thing is like, because we haven't had a steering committee in a while. And so kind of seeing like how does that fit in with the full committee as well? Because I know we had that conversation on how, because obviously the steering committee is just, leadership, and then it's open to everyone else. But how does that, like kind of see like a complication, and I'm like kind of confused on how that's gonna work. Again, like steering committee and full committee.
Let me know if you want me to answer a question or if you're just discussing. I'm happy to answer any questions from my perspective.
Oh, yeah, please.
Yes, please, to those 2. The difference between the steering committee and full committee, and the responsibilities for the full.
The difference between The purpose of a steering committee is a little bit, it's more meta, sort of. It's to sort of lay out the framework for the agendas, more or less. It's like, how is the committee deciding what work makes it into the meetings before you have the substantive meetings about that work. So all the parts of the leadership would get together on whatever basis you decide. I was saying quarterly, and you say, okay, what is this subcommittee going to do? Mostly it would be about the subcommittees, but I think you could chart the course for full committees as well. Because so that's steering committee, broadly speaking. And I think historically they voted essentially on what the plan for the agendas would be. And probably also determined what the what the general direction of the work would be. Not super specifically, but like, we're going to look at consent searches and our hope is that we do this, or we want to have these sorts of events, or we want to write a recommendation on it, right? It wouldn't just be like topic, right? There'd be some sort of direction discussion. Does that make sense for steering committee?
Yeah.
Okay. So the full committee, and I think we do need to do a much better job of this. Dan was speaking to it a little bit earlier. The full committee should be the place where the full body is convening once a month. So the subcommittee should report, provide a pretty thorough report of their work in the full committee. That would also solve the problem of everyone feeling like they need to attend all the meetings, right? And then if there's any resolution that needs to happen about like, okay, well, this is what we have been working on, or we said this is the direction we were going to go in, this is the shape that it's taking. So it's an opportunity to get that input from the broader group about how things are shaping up, because the next month you're going to be advancing further on that project, and then in the hopes of bringing it back to the full committee eventually for a vote of some kind, probably, right? So you want to make sure that you're keeping them up to speed and incorporating their input to yield a product that they support. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually we take a lot longer to talk through things than we think too.
Sure.
And then
Sometimes
there's always like other full committee business too.
Yeah. Yeah.
and like general updates about what's happening with police, what's happening with the settlement agreement. Like there's always new things to talk about too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes more sense, Dory. Thank you.
Viva, I saw you come off mute. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out all this technology stuff. My question was, do we figure this out now or do we figure out later? We don't need to talk it through if there's still like planning processes in place for this, but like, how is the steering committee determining the focuses that they are like, where is it a meeting of the minds, or are there any like formal mechanisms in place to really inform that?
Formal mechanisms, not so much. But what I would say is, so maybe others here could speak a little bit to how the agenda setting process currently works. Setting agendas is, I would say, in my opinion, the most important responsibility of leadership. You are on this committee to represent the broader community, but you are also entrusted with, having your own perspectives and being the people serving on this committee and directing the work. So committee leadership determines the agendas, and ideally that's a combination of community concerns that are brought up at meetings, things that PCCEP members are aware of that are happening at the city, things progressing in the settlement agreement, things the amici might convey, et cetera, right? I do see this as being more fully supported by our community engagement staff in ways that I don't entirely know yet, because we don't have that person. But you know, just deeper community engagement would support that too.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Well, I was going to share, Viva, that at the end of our recommendations, we have a list of questions. Did this address this? Did this address that? And I find that helpful in my personal evaluation of, is the topic a PCEP topic? I haven't personally been involved in setting agendas. I do feel the committee has been good about listening to priorities and weighing in individuals' opinions. But in turn, we don't have a checklist or like a lens review or anything like that. But I think it's the questions at the end of our recommendations and going back to the main purpose of the settlement are very helpful.
All right, so there's a couple minutes left in this discussion aspect, and then we're going to ask the committee to move towards making a decision on this piece and voting. So are there any outstanding, we may move to that? So we want to open the floor for any burning questions, anything that's still lingering, even if it's small. This is a great opportunity to get that out and have that conversation. Go ahead, Devontae.
So if we're going to be moving on to voting here shortly, I think I've made it pretty clear. I'm in favor of option B, right? But if we are going to do option A, is there a way that we can address prior to that if we are keeping the community engagement part of that, or if we are altering that portion of it, with the basis of that being that community engagement should be a part of whatever subcommittees naturally anyways. Can we have a talk about that?
Yes. I'm looking at Dory. Dory, you want to come off mute and speak to your nodding?
I totally agree with that, Devontae, because I think that's the only way to prevent the whole issue that people agree about, which is the whatever we would call the community engagement subcommittee and hopefully reshape a bit. That doesn't exist to do community engagement for the rest of the parts of the committee. So everyone should be empowered to do their own outreach and engagement. And yeah, I agree with that sentiment.
Right.
Or all parts of the committee, rather, not everyone.
Go ahead, Jorge.
I was just going to say that I want to kind of, like, before we decide on something, like, I kind of want to see it first on, like, exactly what we're going to be voting for. Like, if we're switching it up a bit, you know, like sticking with how the options are right now, if we want to switch the options, if we want to add additional tasks or responsibilities and such, just so it's clear to all of us, because it does look like there is some, like, it is clear that there's differences in like likes on both, but that something should be, you know, switched around.
Is it possible to get a draft of what those topics could look like? Maybe typed up in the chat or something so folks could have a
I don't
look.
know. What do you all think? Like, what are you feeling? You know, we have 10 minutes left. What are you thinking about in terms of moving towards a decision?
I
Yes.
feel good. I feel like if folks are hung up on like changing the name, I think we can change it after still, but just agree that it doesn't have to be community engagement. Or do people need like it's still community equity something, but we just don't have a name, or do folks feel like they need a name?
I think for me, it's more like from the original draft of like tasks and responsibilities on like these subcommittees. I think some change still needs to be done, and so I'm not comfortable voting on either options until I see like a kind of final draft, because since then we've had a lot of discussion about these changes and like obviously the name and such and everything. That's just how I'm feeling right now. I don't know what Devontae will have.
Yeah, go ahead, Devontae. And
Noel can go before I go. Noel hasn't.
Thank you. So this is just to Dory's original question, how we're feeling and thoughts on it. But I really liked option A because if you look at the tasks in option A, it does include about racial justice and behavioral aspects that are taken into account in this subcommittee. So I felt like option A really encompassed the whole thing in like the racial justice and behavioral portion of it. And it would be more broad enough for the community to have input rather than it being isolated to just racial justice or behavioral health. I am open to voting on it right now, and the name could be changed after. That's my personal opinion, or my opinion for right now on it. I know others feel differently, but that was my thoughts.
thank you, Noel. Devontae?
Yeah, I don't think it's as simple as if we do go with option A. I don't think it's as simple as just a name change. I think that we are changing the focus of the group with the understanding that we are getting a full community engagement staff whose job is going to be a lot of the things that, in my opinion, are outlined in some of the tasks of that group. And that no matter what the subcommittees are, they should both be self-sufficient enough to community engage and also work towards putting that into actual actionable policy reform. So, if we were going to change the community engagement to instead, I think I originally said community harm, repair, and equity, or something that speaks to fostering trust between law enforcement and the community, repairing harm, restoration, something of that nature. I think that that's a completely different angle than what is currently there, and that's not just a name change. So I think that in order for us to really move on with the vote, we would have to have completely, defined options before we do that.
I agree with you, Devontae, and I do think that the scope of work for community engagement A would need tweaking. But I do see a very big difference between what a full-time community engagement person would be doing and what our responsibilities are in terms of community engagement. The listening to the community and providing the platform is our responsibility. We can't let a staff person do that. That's not their role. They will be opening those doors for us and reaching the new communities to tell them where we are and helping us identify the communities that we're missing. So it's not going to become our responsibilities are still our responsibilities. So I just wanted to raise that.
And Carrie, where are you at as far as voting this evening? Or
I'm ready with the caveat that we revisit if we go with A, we revisit community engagement in terms of its title and tweak its scope of work.
all right, thank you, Carrie. Leslie?
Yeah, was gonna say very similar to Carrie. I feel like we are mostly ready, or like I think we have a good idea of what A would be. And no matter what the process is, or the subcommittees end up being, we are gonna have to tweak, and it is an experiment. And I'd rather kind of start tweaking and start getting like boots on the ground and start doing things and then figuring out what works for us than trying to get like a very, very perfect idea and that we're going to end up tweaking anyway. Because that's just reality. So for me, I think at this point, done is better than perfect, and we can move forward with what we have. That would be my vote.
Thank you, Leslie. Go ahead, Dory.
Okay, so I have a proposal, which is I think tonight we could kind of decide that PCEP's going in the direction of option A without, you don't necessarily need to vote on that, but and we can, I believe that we should have plenty of time in the meeting on February 26th. Elections don't typically take super long. Okay, only problem is elections. That's why we were kind of trying to get this resolved, right? Is so you all know what you're running for. And I do really still want to accomplish that. But what I'm thinking is we're going in the direction of option A. And I think I'm really hearing what you're saying about retooling the community engagement subcommittee. I completely agree. I think we can come up with something good there. But I also want to say, I don't think you need a super clear dialed in proposal of what these things are. I think that the subcommittee should be one of the first things you do is decide what you are and your scope and like you should determine that as a subcommittee. And it's really good that we've had these conversations because you're all aware of the risks and the problems and the overlap and all that stuff. But if we're creating something brand new, you probably are going to do that over time in a group, right? So I think we could come up with a better name and a better scope for the second one. But we don't need to put too much pressure on exactly what it is and exactly what it does. Does that sound reasonable? I think we should have a general sense of what it is and what it does.
I'm still middle on that story.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree that we can probably tighten it up. I do think we need to have a general understanding of what each committee will be focused on, how they go about it, and how they want to name it might change, I guess. But if we're going to do elections at the end of the month, we would really need to solidify that ahead of time. We do have, and it's a couple weeks away. I think if we right now agree that we want to lean towards an option A with the two general senses of the subcommittees, but we want to workshop more what the community piece of it is. Maybe we can do that through our city emails or however else we want to communicate to do that, so that when we do come at the end of the month, it is more clear. But I don't, again, I want to be cognizant of the fact that we're having this discussion in public. We have people weighing in public right now, but I think the details of the dividing lines can maybe be worked out asynchronously.
Yeah.
I might be really slow on this. On option A, if you're in option A, are you on subcommittee either number 1 or number 2? Or when you're on option A, are you working in both subcommittees? And then I have one more question is where I want to vote for where youth is being worked with, because I'm in the middle of a big youth project. Those are my two questions.
In option A, you could join either or both subcommittees.
Okay.
As far as where youth would be being worked on, that would be flexible, depending on what the topic is and if youth are impacted by that topic.
Thank you.
Jorge?
Yeah, I think the only two things that I would want to say is other than being at time, which is not an issue for me, but I want to respect other folks' time. I still see some division and still like not fully understanding and fully in an agreement on moving forward. Like I see some folks are, some are still kind of stall on the issue. So if that's still the case, like I don't think it's best to continue and move with the move on a decision if it's still split and split.
All right, Carrie?
Just wanna question, my sort of 360-degree take on it, is the option A is very output based. You know, what would be the deliverable? And that's how we would decide. Option B is topic based, which can bleed into both topics, and we talked about in our little subgroup, the subcommittee. But originally, PCEP was just focused on mental health, if I'm not incorrect. It was, I mean, it was, I know in the settlement agreement, that was the primary. And I'm not, and we have a lot of important topics to cover, but my concern with the option B is that the priority topics, if we're only going to have 2 subcommittees maximum, the priority topics, knowing that behavioral health is always going to be one of them, it's a little bit harder for me to wrap around how those would be decided fairly.
Can you elaborate on that, on what you mean?
Well, I'd like somebody to support me on the origination of PCEP being focused on behavioral and mental health. Or tell me that I'm wrong. Because I am I'm under the understanding that that was really the primary focus, and lots of reasons led us to focus on, racial justice and equity as well, as we should. But it's just to raise the point that if we've added if that's the topic we added, what topics do we add in the future? How does that affect our ability to have